She was 12 years old, and the streets had already written her ending. No school, no protection, a mother the world called crazy. Every day, she learned one lesson. Smart doesn't matter if you're invisible. Then something happened that was never supposed to happen. A homeless girl began secretly teaching a billionaire's daughter under a mango tree. Right inside a school she wasn't allowed to enter. When the girl's father found out, everyone expected one outcome. They were wrong, because what he did next changed everything. This isn't just a story. It's the moment power collided with truth. Watch carefully, and if you're just joining, subscribe to this channel for more videos. Imani Brooks was 12 years old, but childhood had never really belonged to her. She didn't lose it. She never touched it. It passed her by like a car that never slowed down. She was born on concrete, not wrapped in hospital sheets, but surrounded by noise. Horns blaring, voices shouting, footsteps rushing past. Her earliest memories were not of toys or bedtime stories, but of cold mornings and burning afternoons, of learning how to curl her body small enough so people wouldn't trip over her. Every morning, the city woke her. Not gently. A bus engine coughing to life. A vendor slamming metal pots together. Someone shouting at her to move like she was trash blocking the road. Imani slept beside gutters and broken sidewalks, her cheek pressed against cardboard softened by yesterday's rain. Sometimes ants crawled across her arms. Sometimes rats scurried close enough that she could hear their breath. She learned not to scream. Noise attracted attention, and attention was dangerous. Beside her lay her mother, Renee Brooks. Or at least, her body did. Renee's mind lived somewhere else entirely. Some mornings she rocked back and forth, humming melodies that sounded like memories trying to survive. On other days, she screamed at invisible enemies, swatting at the air, accusing shadows of stealing things that never existed. There were moments, rare, fragile moments, when she would cup Imani's face and smile, calling her baby, calling her by name like it still meant something. Those moments were the hardest, because they always ended. Most days, Imani was the adult. She guided her mother away from traffic, cleaned her when people spat insults, whispered calming words when Renee's fear exploded without warning. She learned how to read her mother's eyes the way other children learned to read books. One glance told her whether today would be manageable or dangerous. Fear became routine. Hunger became background noise. By sunrise, the insults began. Madwoman's child. Get lost. Dirty thing. Some people said it loudly. Others said it with their eyes. Some didn't say anything at all. They simply stepped over her like she wasn't human. That was the worst part, being unseen. Imani learned that invisibility could protect her. If she stayed quiet enough, small enough, the world might forget she was there. But forgetting didn't stop her mind. As the city rushed forward, Imani stood still and watched children walk past in school uniforms. Clean shirts, polished shoes, backpacks heavy with books instead of hunger. Some laughed loudly. Some complained about tests. Some dragged their feet like school was a burden instead of a blessing. Imani memorized everything. The way letters curved on signboards. The way teachers' voices carried through open windows. The rhythm of multiplication tables chanted in unison. She didn't know why she remembered so much. She just did. At night, while Renee muttered to ghosts beside her, Imani whispered numbers under her breath. She traced invisible letters on her thigh with her finger. She made up spelling tests and graded herself in her head. When she didn't know a word, she guessed, and usually guessed right. Her mind was sharp, sharp enough to hurt, because intelligence without opportunity is a cruel thing. It shows you doors you're never allowed to open. Hunger followed her everywhere. Some days they ate bread, some days nothing at all. When coins fell into Renee's palm, Imani counted them quickly, already calculating what they could buy. She always gave her mother the bigger share. Always. Her stomach learned to wait. One afternoon, as heat shimmered above the road, a group of schoolgirls passed by. One of them slowed when she saw Imani. Their eyes met, just for a second. The girl hesitated, then turned away, embarrassed, whispering something to her friend. They laughed. Imani didn't cry. Crying wasted energy. She looked down at her bare feet, cracked and dusty, and tightened her grip on her mother's hand. One day, she whispered, not loudly, not bravely, just enough to keep the thought alive. One day, she would sit in a classroom. One day, someone would teach her properly. One day, she wouldn't have to guard her mother against a world that refused to be kind. The city didn't care about her promises. It moved on. Rain came without warning sometimes. When it did, Imani held her mother close, using her own body as a shield. Their clothes soaked through. The cardboard dissolved beneath them. Still, she stayed awake, watching, listening, alert for danger. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. At night, she stared at the sky through gaps between buildings, wondering how something so big could exist while her world stayed so small. She asked questions she never said out loud. Why give me a mind like this? Why let me understand so much if I can't use it? Why make me smart just to suffer? No answers came. Just traffic. Just noise. Just another night. Yet something inside her refused to go quiet. Even when her body ached. Even when her stomach burned. Even when her name was spoken like an insult. Imani Brooks was 12 years old, shaped by streets that age her faster than time ever could. But beneath the dirt and exhaustion lived something unbroken. Something waiting. She didn't know it yet, but the story of her life was only just beginning. Imani Brooks learned very early that love could be heavy. Not the kind that felt warm and safe, but the kind that sat on your chest and made it hard to breathe. The kind that forced a child to grow up before her bones were ready to carry the weight. Her mother, Renee Brooks, did not wake up like other mothers. Some mornings, Renee woke screaming. Imani would bolt upright, heart racing, already reaching for her before the sound finished forming. Renee clawed at the air, eyes wide, convinced something invisible was trying to pull her away. Cars honked. People shouted. Someone cursed. Imani wrapped her arms around her mother and whispered the same words every time. It's me. I'm here. You're safe. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. When it didn't, Imani held on anyway. She learned how to calm storms she didn't understand. She learned how to guide her mother away from traffic without drawing attention. She learned how to apologize to strangers for things her mother said, even when those strangers responded with cruelty. Renee's illness had no pattern, no warning. One moment she was quiet, staring into nothing. The next, she was laughing loudly, clapping her hands, accusing the air of stealing her thoughts. Some days she refused to move. Other days she ran, forcing Imani to chase her barefoot through crowded streets. Imani never let go. Not once. Even when people stared. Even when someone shoved her aside. Even when her arms shook from exhaustion. She was 12 years old, but she lived like a guardian twice her age. There were rules she followed religiously. Never let Renee wander alone. Never argue with her delusions. Never correct her memories. Never cry in front of her. When Renee said birds were demons, Imani nodded. When Renee claimed she used to be a queen, Imani listened. Arguing only made things worse. Silence was safer. Hunger made everything harder. On days when Renee refused to beg, Imani begged for both of them. She lowered her eyes, held out her hand, and learned how to endure rejection without flinching. Coins fell sometimes. Insults fell more often. A woman once looked at Renee and said, "This madness is contagious." Imani stood in front of her mother without thinking, her body trembling but defiant. "She's sick," she said quietly. The woman laughed and walked away. Moments like that burned into her memory. They taught her that the world had very little patience for weakness, and none at all for madness. At night, when Renee finally slept, Imani stayed awake. She listened. She listened for footsteps, for voices that came too close, for danger. Sleep never came easily. When it did, it was light and fragile, ready to shatter at the smallest sound. She learned to function on exhaustion, to ignore pain, to move forward even when her body begged her to stop. Still, there were moments that confused her. Moments when Renee became someone else. On rare mornings, Renee would brush imaginary dust from Imani's hair and smile softly. She would hum an old tune, one that sounded like it came from another life. She would call Imani her baby and ask if she had eaten. Those mornings were the most dangerous, because they made Imani hope. She treasured those moments like glass, careful not to breathe too hard, afraid they would break. And they always did. Renee would slip away again, lost to voices only she could hear, leaving Imani alone with the echo of what could have been. Imani learned not to ask questions. She asked them in her head instead. Why did my mother get help? Why did everyone walk past us? Why did love feel like punishment? She had no answers, only responsibility. One afternoon, Renee suddenly ran toward the road, screaming that someone had taken her shadow. Imani chased her, heart pounding, grabbing her just as a bus screeched to a stop inches away. People shouted. A driver cursed. Someone laughed. Imani held her mother, shaking, while Renee sobbed into her chest like a frightened child. That night, Imani didn't sleep at all. She stared at the sky and realized something terrifying. If she ever stopped being strong, everything would fall apart. So she didn't stop. She became careful, alert, calculated. She chose spots to sit where people passed quickly. She learned which corners were safer at night. She memorized faces that lingered too long. She knew which streets to avoid after dark. This was not knowledge meant for a child, but it was the knowledge that kept them alive. Yet even as her days filled with fear and duty, Imani's mind refused to shrink to match her circumstances. When Renee slept, Imani whispered lessons to herself. She repeated words she had heard in passing. She practiced mental math. She imagined herself explaining things clearly, confidently, the way teachers did. Learning became her escape, her rebellion, her proof that she was more than what the streets called her. One evening, as Renee mumbled beside her, Imani quietly recited numbers under her breath. Renee suddenly stopped rocking and looked at her. "What are you saying?" she asked. Imani froze. "Nothing," she replied softly. Renee stared at her for a long moment, eyes strangely clear. Then she smiled. "You're smart," she said. The words hit harder than any insult ever had. Imani swallowed. Her throat burned. Renee's clarity vanished seconds later, but the words stayed. That night, curled beside her mother, Imani made a silent decision. No matter how heavy the love became, no matter how much responsibility crushed her chest, no matter how cruel the world proved itself to be, she would not let her mind disappear. She would carry her mother, and she would carry herself, even if it broke her. The first time someone noticed Imani Brooks, it wasn't because she was begging. It wasn't because she was dirty or hungry or sitting beside a woman the world had already given up on. It was because she was watching. Imani had learned how to watch without being seen. It was a skill the streets taught quickly. Eyes lowered, body still, ears open. She noticed things other people missed, the way traffic patterns shifted, the way vendors counted change, the way customers treated sellers differently, depending on how desperate they looked. That afternoon, her stomach hurt in the dull, aching way that came after days without real food. Renee sat beside her, unusually quiet, rocking slowly and humming to herself. The sun pressed down hard, baking the pavement until heat rose in waves. That was when Imani noticed the food stand across the road. The smell reached her first. Rice, oil, spice. Her stomach twisted painfully. She swallowed and looked away. Looking too long made hunger louder. But someone was watching her. Imani felt it before she saw it. She glanced up and met the eyes of a woman standing behind the food stand. The woman wasn't staring with pity or disgust. Her gaze was steady, curious, measuring. Imani looked away immediately. Being noticed was dangerous. Minutes passed. Customers came and went. Renee kept humming. Imani focused on keeping her mother calm, her hand resting lightly on Renee's arm, ready to react if she suddenly stood or screamed. Then footsteps stopped in front of her. Imani stiffened. A shadow fell across the ground. "What's your name?" the woman asked. Her voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't loud. It didn't carry the edge of accusation Imani was used to. Imani hesitated, eyes fixed on the ground. "Imani," she whispered. "And your mother?" the woman asked gently. Imani pointed. The woman followed her gaze. She didn't flinch, didn't recoil, didn't step back. "She's sick, isn't she?" the woman said quietly. Imani nodded. The woman crouched and set a covered plate on the ground between them. "Eat," she said. Imani froze. Strangers never gave without expecting something. Nothing in her life had taught her otherwise. I'm not like the others, the woman added, as if she could read Imani's fear. The smell was unbearable now. Imani's hands trembled as she reached for the plate. The food was warm, real, rice, meat. She ate slowly at first, afraid it might disappear if she moved too fast. Then hunger took over. Tears stung her eyes as she chewed. The woman watched quietly. I'm Miss Carla Johnson, she said after a while. What do you do out here all day? Imani swallowed. I take care of my mom, she said. That was the truth. It was always the truth. Ms. Johnson nodded, as if that answer meant something. That evening, Ms. Johnson returned with water and soap. She helped Imani wash her hands. She didn't rush. She didn't lecture. She asked questions, and for the first time in a long time, someone listened to the answers. Imani told her everything. About sleeping outside. About being chased away. About wanting to go to school more than anything else. She didn't cry, but her voice shook. Ms. Johnson was quiet for a long time after. Then she said, Come tomorrow. Help me clean the stand. I'll feed you. Imani nodded so fast her neck hurt. The next day, she came early. She swept. She washed plates. She carried water. Her arms ached, but she didn't slow down. She watched how Ms. Johnson handled customers, how she counted money, how she stood her ground without raising her voice. In the afternoons, when business slowed, Imani sat nearby and wrote numbers in the dirt with a stick. Ms. Johnson noticed. Where did you learn that? She asked. Imani shrugged. I listened. That answer stayed with Ms. Johnson. A week later, she brought Imani a notebook and pencils. Imani held them like they were fragile glass. A week after that, Ms. Johnson did something that terrified Imani more than the streets ever had. She took her to school. The uniform was secondhand, too big, the shoes pinched. But when Imani stood in front of the classroom, heart racing, she felt taller than she ever had. The first question the teacher asked, Imani answered without thinking. The room went silent. From that day on, everything changed. She learned fast, faster than anyone else. Teachers stared at her with confusion, then interest. Children whispered. Some laughed. Some avoided her. Imani didn't care. She was finally where she belonged. Every afternoon, she returned to the food stand to work. She was exhausted, but happy. Ms. Johnson watched her closely, pride quietly growing. Then one evening, Ms. Johnson came home holding an envelope. Her papers had been approved. She was leaving the country. Imani felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. I paid your school fees for this term, Ms. Johnson said carefully. After that, I don't know. Imani nodded. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. 3 weeks later, Ms. Johnson was gone. The next term, the school asked for fees. Imani didn't have them. She stood outside the gate all day, waiting. No one came. The gates closed. And just like that, the world she had tasted was taken away. That night, Imani sat beside her mother again. Notebook clutched her chest. The streets welcomed her back without ceremony. But something inside her had changed. She had seen what was possible, and she refused to forget it. Imani Brooks learned something brutal the day she was turned away from school. Hope hurts more when you've tasted it. She stood outside the school gate long before the sun reached its highest point. Her uniform was clean but faded, the fabric loose on her thin frame. She held her notebook tight against her chest, as if pressing it hard enough could convince the world she still belonged there. Children streamed past her in clusters. Some recognized her. Some whispered. Some stared like she was a mistake that hadn't been erased yet. Imani didn't move. She told herself Miss Carla Johnson would come back. She had to. People didn't just disappear after changing your life. They didn't open a door and then lock it without warning. Hours passed. The gate remained closed. When the head administrator finally noticed her, the woman frowned as if trying to remember where Imani belonged. You can't be here, she said flatly. No fees, no class. Imani swallowed. She paid last term, she whispered. She said she'd come back. The woman sighed, already bored. People say many things, she replied. Go home. Home. The word hit harder than the rejection. Imani stood there until the final bell rang, until parents arrived with snacks and hugs, until the courtyard emptied and the shadows stretched long across the ground. No one came for her. That night, the streets felt colder than before. The broken kiosk where she used to sleep was occupied now. A man sat there drinking, his eyes sharp and unfriendly. When Imani tried to pass, he raised his hand threateningly. She backed away silently, pulling her mother with her. Every safe place she remembered was gone. The streets had shifted while she was away. They always did. Renee wandered again, worse than before. She shouted at nothing, laughed at pain, struck out when frightened. Imani absorbed every blow meant for the world. She cleaned blood from her lip one night and said nothing. The next morning, she wore her school uniform again, not because she thought they'd let her in, but because she didn't know who she was without it. She stood by the fence, listening. Lessons drifted through the air, voices she recognized, words she remembered. She repeated them silently, refusing to let them fade. A teacher spotted her and frowned. "What are you doing here?" the woman snapped. "I just want to listen," Imani said. "Listening isn't allowed," the teacher replied. "Leave." When Imani didn't move fast enough, the teacher raised her voice. Other children laughed. Heat rushed to Imani's face as shame burned through her chest. She ran, not because she was afraid, because she didn't want them to see her cry. Days turned into weeks. The notebook Ms. Johnson had given her grew thin and worn. One night, rain soaked it through, blurring the ink until the pages became unreadable. Imani stared at the ruined words until her chest tightened. Then she closed it carefully, as if protecting something already lost. She began selling water to survive. The tray was heavy. Her feet blistered. Adults shoved her aside. Boys stole her customers. When she paused to rest, someone yelled at her to move. Once, a man dropped money into her tray out of kindness. Moments later, it was stolen. She chased until her lungs burned, then stopped, realizing she could not outrun the streets. That evening, she fed her mother bread and said she wasn't hungry. It was a lie. One night, a group of older boys sat nearby, smoking something sharp and bitter. One of them looked at her and smiled crookedly. "Come join us," he said. "It helps you forget." Imani shook her head and walked away. Forgetting wasn't an option. She still had her mind, and she refused to lose that too. Every morning, she returned to schools. Different ones. Any she could reach. She listened through broken fences, through open windows, through cracks meant to keep people like her out. She mouthed words quietly. She corrected mistakes under her breath. She memorized lessons she wasn't allowed to learn. Some teachers chased her away. Some guards threatened her. One grabbed her arm and shoved her to the ground. "Next time I see you here," he warned, "I'll beat you." Imani limped away, heart pounding, not from fear, but anger. That night, she sat beneath a tree and wrote multiplication tables in the dirt. When the wind erased them, she started again. And again. She asked the sky questions she no longer expected answers to. Why give me this mind if I can't use it? Why show me a door just to close it? The city answered with silence. But inside her, something hardened. Hope was no longer soft. It became sharp. It became stubborn. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was searching. Searching for a crack. A weakness. A way in. And somewhere beyond the streets she knew, beyond the fences and locked gates, a place existed that would change everything. Imani didn't know it yet. But the door that slammed shut behind her was not the end. It was the force that would push her forward. By the time Imani Brooks turned 13, hunger no longer frightened her. It annoyed her. Hunger had become a constant noise, like traffic in the distance. Always there, impossible to silence. Her body had learned how to move through it, how to work while empty, how to think while weak. But her mind refused to shrink to match her circumstances. That was the part the streets could not control. Every morning before the city fully woke, Imani made her rounds. She checked the spots she and her mother could still sit without being chased. She scanned faces, memorizing who had yelled yesterday and who might ignore her today. She guided Renee carefully, her hand firm but gentle, steering her away from danger like a seasoned guard. Renee's illness deepened. Some days she was silent, eyes vacant, fingers tracing invisible shapes on the ground. Other days, she was loud, angry, convinced people were stealing things from her mind. When she became too agitated, people shouted at her. When she became too quiet, people forgot she existed. Imani noticed everything. She noticed how people softened when they thought someone was harmless. She noticed how authority hardened when it felt challenged. She learned how to stand slightly behind her mother, visible enough to seem obedient, invisible enough to avoid confrontation. But education did not obey those rules. Learning demanded attention, and Imani gave it everything she had. She started carrying scraps of paper everywhere, torn flyers, cardboard pieces, the clean sides of discarded packaging. When she found a pencil stub or broken pen, she guarded it fiercely. At night, she wrote letters slowly, carefully, sounding them out under her breath. A, B, C. When the paper ran out, she wrote in dirt. When the dirt was swept away, she wrote again. Learning became her rebellion. It was the only thing she controlled. She returned to school she had been chased from before. She knew the schedules now. She knew when classes were loud enough to cover her presence, when teachers were distracted, when guards changed shifts. She positioned herself where sound carried best, through a cracked window, behind a fence with bent wires, beside a wall that echoed voices. She learned fractions before she learned where she would sleep that night. She memorized grammar rules while her stomach twisted in protest. She corrected mistakes under her breath when students inside answered incorrectly. Sometimes she smiled. That was dangerous. Smiling made her forget where she was. One afternoon, while crouched near a classroom wall, a stone hit her shoulder. She flinched but didn't cry. A boy her age stood nearby, smirking, which, he said, "Go away." Laughter followed. Imani stood slowly, brushed dirt from her dress, and walked away without a word. She didn't look back. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Pain passed. Knowledge stayed. The streets tested her constantly. Once, after selling water all day, she counted her earnings carefully. Enough for food. Enough to keep Renee quiet that night. As she turned away, a hand grabbed the money and vanished into the crowd. She didn't chase. She sat down instead, heart pounding, hands shaking, not from loss but from restraint. Crying wouldn't bring it back. Screaming wouldn't feed her mother. She stood up and kept moving. That night, she fed Renee bread and water and said she wasn't hungry. It was the truth and a lie at the same time. Renee looked at her suddenly, eyes sharp for one fleeting moment. "You're too serious," she said. Imani blinked. Children are supposed to laugh. The moment passed. Renee returned to her whispers, but the words stayed. Children are supposed to laugh. Imani didn't remember how. She remembered letters, numbers, lessons, survival. One evening, she found herself near a school she had never dared approach before. The walls were tall, clean, guarded. Cars lined the entrance. Not buses, not bikes, cars that shone even in fading light. Children stepped out wearing blazers and polished shoes. Their bags were structured, heavy with books she could only imagine. This place was different. Everything about it said, "Not for you." Imani stood across the road, heart pounding. She watched. She listened. She learned the rhythm of the place. She noticed something important. A mango tree near the back fence. Large, old, its branches stretched wide, offering shade and cover. A window nearby was often left slightly open. No one stood there. No guard watched that angle. The next day, she came earlier. She waited until lunch. When the bell rang and voices flooded the yard, she moved. Slowly, carefully, she slipped along the fence, ducked under branches, and crouched near the tree. Her breath came shallow as she listened. English, math, reading, clear, close. Her fingers tightened around her pencil stub. She wrote on the back of an old flyer, copying words as quickly as she could. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't afraid. She was focused. Minutes passed, then more. No shouting, no chasing, no threats, just learning. Imani felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Not hope, determination. This place held something she needed. She didn't belong there, but she wasn't leaving. As the bell rang again and students poured out, Imani slipped away unnoticed. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with certainty. She would come back, again and again, because learning was no longer just a dream. It was a fight, and Imani Brooks had never been afraid of fighting for survival. Imani Brooks was not supposed to be there. Every detail of the place made that clear. The school grounds were quiet in a way she wasn't used to. No shouting vendors, no honking horns, no chaos fighting for space. Even the air felt different, cleaner, lighter, like it belonged to people who had never slept on concrete. She crouched beneath the mango tree, its wide branches shielding her from view. The bark was rough beneath her fingers, familiar in a comforting way. Trees didn't judge. Trees didn't ask questions. From where she sat, she could see into the classroom through the open window. Clear boards, neat desks, children seated comfortably, not hunched or tense. A teacher moved calmly at the front, explaining a lesson on fractions. Her voice was steady, patient. Imani leaned closer. She pulled out a scrap of paper and her pencil stub, copying numbers as quickly as her fingers allowed. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She listened the way only someone starved of learning could listen, with her whole body. 1/2 plus 1/4. Imani whispered the answer before any student inside raised a hand. She smiled. The smile startled her. She had forgotten what it felt like to enjoy something without fear. Days passed like this. She came during lunch, stayed hidden, learned quietly, and left without being seen. Each time, her confidence grew. She memorized the schedule. She learned which classrooms were loudest, which teachers liked to keep windows open. The mango tree became her place, her secret. Then one day someone spoke. "You're always here." Imani froze. Her heart slammed into her ribs. Her hand tightened around the pencil, ready to drop everything and run. She turned slowly. A girl stood a few feet away, watching her. She was about Imani's age. Her uniform was spotless, her hair neatly braided, her shoes polished enough to reflect light. Everything about her said she belonged. Imani stood abruptly. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I'll go." She stepped back, eyes lowered, already bracing for shouting, for threats, for being chased like always. But none came. "Why?" the girl asked instead. Imani paused. "Why do you come here?" the girl repeated. No one had ever asked her that before. Imani swallowed. Her voice came out small. "Because I want to learn." The girl tilted her head, studying her closely, not with disgust, not with mockery, but confusion. "You don't go to school?" she asked. Imani shook her head. "My mom is sick," she said. "We live outside." The words felt heavy in her mouth. She rarely said them aloud. The girl was quiet for a moment. Then she surprised her again. "They say I'm stupid." Imani looked up. "What?" "They say I don't understand anything," the girl continued. "That my dad pays the school to move me forward." Her voice dropped lower. "I sit alone during lunch, so they won't laugh." Imani didn't know what to say. This girl had everything Imani lacked. Money, safety, a future, and yet her eyes held the same loneliness. "My name is Aaliyah," the girl said after a moment. "Imani," she replied. Aaliyah hesitated, then sat down on the grass beneath the tree. She patted the ground beside her. Imani hesitated. Sitting felt dangerous, but she lowered herself slowly. Aaliyah pulled a textbook from her bag and opened it. "Can you explain this?" she asked quietly. Imani's breath caught. She studied the page. Fractions. Simple. Clear. She pointed to the numbers. "Look," she said carefully. "You can't add them like that because they don't have the same bottom number." Aaliyah leaned closer. Imani explained slowly, using pebbles and lines in the dirt. Her voice steadied as she spoke. Teaching felt natural, comfortable. Aaliyah's eyes widened. "Oh," she said, "that makes sense." They worked through another problem, then another. Minutes passed unnoticed. When the bell rang, Aaliyah gasped. "I get it," she said, smiling. "I actually get it." Imani smiled back before she could stop herself. No one had ever looked at her like that, like she mattered. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Aaliyah asked. Imani's smile faded. "They'll chase me," she said. "I don't belong here." Aaliyah stood abruptly. "Wait." She ran off. Imani's chest tightened. Panic rose fast. She had stayed too long. Then Aaliyah returned, with a security officer behind her. Imani stood, ready to flee. "This is my friend," Aaliyah said firmly. "Her name is Imani. She'll be here during lunch." The guard frowned. "But she's not a student." "My dad owns the school," Aaliyah interrupted. "And I want her here." The guard hesitated, then nodded. Aaliyah turned back to Imani, smiling. "Same time tomorrow," she said. Imani walked away in a daze. Her feet touched the ground, but she didn't feel it. That night, as Renee hummed beside her, Imani stared at the sky and whispered a prayer she had never dared to say before. "Please," she said softly, "let this be real." For the first time in her life, she fell asleep smiling. Imani Brooks came back the next day, and the day after that. Each time she slipped through the same path, ducked beneath the same mango branches, and sat in the same patch of shade like it was sacred ground. The mango tree became more than a hiding place. It became a border between two worlds, and somehow, beneath its leaves, those worlds no longer mattered. Aaliyah was always waiting. Sometimes she arrived first, lunchbox in hand, eyes scanning the path until she saw Imani appear. Other times, Imani reached the tree early and waited, heart racing, afraid the promise might vanish. But Aaliyah always came, and each time, relief flooded Imani's chest. They talked quietly at first, like people afraid the air itself might betray them. Lessons came easily. Teaching felt like breathing to Imani. She broke down words, numbers, ideas, reshaping them until they made sense. Aaliyah listened with an intensity that surprised her teachers and confused her classmates. "You explain it like stories," Aaliyah said one afternoon. "Teachers make it feel like punishment." Imani smiled shyly. "Everything makes sense if you slow down." Aaliyah tried again, stumbling, then succeeding. When she did, Imani clapped without thinking. Aaliyah laughed, startled. "No one's ever clapped for me," she admitted. Imani blinked. "Why?" Aaliyah shrugged. "People only notice me when I mess up. Or my dad throws parties." The words settled between them, heavy and honest. Under the mango tree, they shared more than lessons. Aaliyah shared her fear of disappointing her father. How every report card felt like a trial. How teachers smiled politely but never believed in her. How classmates whispered that she didn't deserve her place. Imani shared her nights on concrete. Her mother's illness. The fear of waking up and finding Renee gone or worse. She didn't soften the truth. She didn't have to. Aaliyah listened like every word mattered. And it did. They shared food. Aaliyah offered pieces of her lunch, watching closely as Imani ate, careful not to make her feel ashamed. Imani accepted without rushing, grateful not just for the food, but for the respect. They shared silence too. Sometimes they sat without speaking, listening to the distant noise of the school, the wind in the leaves, the hum of a world that didn't know they existed. "You're my best friend," Aaliyah said one day, suddenly. Imani froze. No one had ever said that to her before. "You are," Aaliyah repeated, smiling. Imani swallowed. Her chest tightened. "You're mine too," she replied quietly. The word felt dangerous. Friendship made things hurt more when they ended. And deep down, Imani knew this couldn't last. One afternoon, Aaliyah's smile faded. "What if my dad finds out?" she asked. Imani looked down at the ground. "Then you'll forget me." "I won't," Aaliyah said sharply. Imani shook her head. "Rich people don't keep friends like me." Aaliyah grabbed her hand. "You're not like that," she said. "You're different." "Different doesn't change where I sleep," Imani replied softly. They sat in silence, hands still clasped. The danger grew quietly. Teachers began to notice Aaliyah's improvement. Compliments came. Whispers followed. Eyes lingered longer during lunch. Aaliyah answered questions confidently now. Too confidently. Success attracts attention. One morning, Aaliyah rushed to the tree, breathless. "My dad's coming today," she whispered. He didn't say why. Imani's stomach dropped. "He never comes without warning," Aaliyah added. Fear tightened Imani's chest. "Then I shouldn't come," she said. Aaliyah shook her head. "If you don't, he'll still find out something's changed." They sat under the mango tree, the air heavy with unspoken fear. Imani wanted to run, disappear, protect what little peace she had left. But she stayed, because running had never saved her before. That afternoon, engines rolled into the school compound. Black SUVs. Teachers froze mid-step. Students turned. Security stiffened. Aaliyah's face went pale. "That's him," she whispered. Imani stood. "I have to go." She took one step back. "Wait," Aaliyah said, grabbing her arm. "Please." Before Imani could respond, a deep voice cut through the air. "Aaliyah." The world stopped. She turned slowly. Her father was walking toward them, tall, controlled, powerful. His presence silenced everything around him. Assistants followed a few steps behind. His eyes fell on Imani. Sharp, assessing, unforgiving. "Who is that?" he asked. Aaliyah stepped forward. "This is Imani," she said. "She's my friend." Imani's heart pounded so hard it hurt. Her secret world had just been exposed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The silence that followed felt heavier than shouting ever could. Imani Brooks stood frozen beneath the mango tree, her bare feet pressing into the grass as if the ground itself might open and swallow her. She had faced hunger, fear, violence, and abandonment, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Nothing had prepared her for being seen by someone who had the power to erase her with a single word. Malcolm Carter stopped a few steps away. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. That frightened her more than rage ever could. His eyes moved over her slowly, her torn dress, her thin arms, the dirt beneath her fingernails, the way she stood slightly in front of Aaliyah without realizing it, like a shield. "Who is this?" he asked again calmly. Aaliyah's fingers trembled, but she didn't let go of Imani's hand. "This is Imani," she said. "She's my friend." "Your friend," Malcolm repeated. Imani lowered her eyes. Her heart pounded so hard she was afraid he could hear it. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. Aaliyah hesitated. Then she lifted her chin. "Every day," she said. "During lunch. Every day." The words landed like stones. Malcolm exhaled slowly and turned his attention to Imani. "And you," he said. "What are you doing here?" Imani swallowed. Her mouth was dry. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered. "I didn't mean any trouble. I just wanted to learn." "Learn." Malcolm studied her closely now. "You don't attend this school." "No, sir." "Any school?" Imani shook her head. "No one to pay the fees," she said quietly. There it was. The truth. Plain. Unprotected. Aaliyah stepped forward, her voice breaking through the tension. "She teaches me," she said quickly. "She's the reason I understand anything now. Not the tutors. Not the teachers. Her." Malcolm turned to his daughter. "She teaches you." "Yes," Aaliyah said firmly. "She explains things better than anyone." "I'm not stupid, Daddy. I just needed someone who cared enough to slow down." The word daddy cracked something open in the air. Malcolm looked back at Imani. "Who are your parents?" he asked. Imani hesitated. Then answered honestly. "I don't know my father," she said. "My mother, she's sick. She lives on the streets." The words felt heavier, spoken out loud. "Where?" Malcolm asked. "Near the old market road," Imani replied. "By the gutters." One of Malcolm's assistants shifted uncomfortably. Aaliyah squeezed Imani's hand tighter. "She's not lying," she said. "I've seen her feet. I've seen how she eats. She's not pretending." Malcolm closed his eyes briefly. Then he surprised them all. "Take me to her," he said. Imani's head snapped up. "What?" she whispered. "Your mother," he repeated. "Take me to her." Fear surged through her chest. "Sir, please," she said quickly. "She's not dangerous. She doesn't mean any harm. If I've done something wrong, punish me. I'll stop coming. I promise. Just don't." "I'm not here to punish you," Malcolm said, his voice quieter now. "I want to see her." Aaliyah stepped closer to her father. "Promise you won't chase her away," she said. Malcolm looked at his daughter for a long moment. "I promise," he said. 30 minutes later, the SUVs rolled into a part of the city that rarely saw tinted windows or polished shoes. The smell hit first. Burning trash. Stagnant water. Rot. Imani's body tensed automatically. This was her world. Ugly. Dangerous. Exposed. "She's there," she said softly, pointing. Renee sat on the pavement, rocking back and forth, whispering to herself. Her clothes were torn, her hair matted. She held a stone in her hands like it was something precious. "That's my mommy," Imani said, her voice barely holding together. Malcolm stepped out of the vehicle. Slowly, carefully, he crouched down in front of Renee, ignoring the dirt, the smell, the stares. "Hello," he said gently. Renee looked at him, eyes unfocused. "Did you bring my wings?" she asked suddenly. "I left them somewhere." Imani felt her chest collapse. Malcolm didn't flinch. "No," he said softly, "but I came to help." Renee laughed, then began to cry. Imani stepped forward instinctively, ready to calm her, to protect her. Malcolm raised a hand gently. "It's okay," he said. "She trusts you. I can see that." He stood and turned to his assistant. "Call Dr. Williams," he said. "I want immediate psychiatric care. Private facility. Full treatment. No delays." Imani froze. "You're helping her?" she whispered. "Yes," he said simply. Tears blurred her vision. "I don't want money," she said quickly. "I just want her to be okay." Malcolm looked at her. "That's exactly why I will help," he said. He knelt in front of her then, right there on the dirty pavement, and placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "You shouldn't have had to carry this alone," he said. "Not at your age." Imani couldn't speak. "You have a gift," he continued, "and you have courage most adults never develop." Aaliyah stepped beside them. "She's family," she said. Malcolm nodded. "From today," he said, "you are not homeless." The words didn't make sense at first. They didn't feel real. That night, Imani watched as her mother was gently placed into an ambulance. Renee didn't fight. She didn't scream. She just held Imani's hand until the doors closed. "I'll come see you," Imani whispered. For the first time, Renee smiled clearly. "I know," she said. Imani stood in silence as the ambulance pulled away. Something inside her finally broke. Not in pain, in relief. She didn't know what tomorrow would look like. But for the first time in her life, the future no longer felt locked. The world had finally looked at her, and it hadn't turned away. Imani Brooks did not cry that night. Not when she stepped into a bathroom with running water and stood there frozen, staring at it like it was a miracle. Not when warm water touched her skin for the first time in longer than she could remember. Not when clean clothes were placed gently into her hands, folded neatly, waiting for her. She cried later, quietly, alone, when no one could see. The Carter house was too big, too silent, too perfect. Every sound echoed. Every step felt like it didn't belong to her. She walked carefully, afraid to touch things, afraid she might wake up back on the pavement beside the gutter. Aaliyah stayed close, like an anchor. "You're safe," she whispered more than once. "You're really safe." Imani nodded, but her body didn't believe it yet. That night, sleep came in pieces. She woke at every sound, heart racing, ready to run. When morning light crept through the curtains, she sat up slowly, confused by the softness beneath her, by the ceiling above her head. She wasn't outside. She wasn't cold. She was still alive. Down the hall, voices moved calmly. No shouting. No insults. No fear. For the first time, morning didn't feel like a threat. Later that day, Malcolm Carter called her into his study. Imani stood by the door, hands clasped tightly, unsure where to look. The room smelled like leather and books. Real books. Shelves of them. She resisted the urge to touch anything. "I've read your teacher's notes," Malcolm said calmly. "Every single one." Imani swallowed. "They don't know me," she said softly. "Not really. They know enough," he replied. "Enough to be confused." He looked at her steadily. "You've been teaching without resources, learning without permission, surviving without support." He paused, and still excelling. Imani's chest tightened. "I just didn't want to waste my mind," she said. Malcolm leaned back slightly, studying her. "From today," he said, "you won't have to protect your potential alone." She didn't understand what he meant until the next morning. That was the day everything changed. The uniform was new, crisp, perfectly fitted. Her name was stitched inside like proof she existed. Aaliyah stood beside her, grinning, adjusting Imani's collar. "You look like you've always belonged here," she said. Imani looked at her reflection and barely recognized the girl staring back. When they arrived at school, something incredible happened. They didn't sneak in. They didn't hide. They walked through the front gate. Heads turned. Whisper spread. Teachers froze mid-step. The girl who once listened through fences was now walking beside the founder's daughter, her head held high, her footsteps steady. In class, Imani didn't hesitate. She raised her hand. Every question, every lesson. Her answers were calm, clear, confident. Teachers exchanged glances. Notes were written. Meetings were called. By lunchtime, everyone knew. She wasn't just smart. She was extraordinary. But the greatest moment didn't happen in a classroom. It happened weeks later in a quiet hospital room. Renee Brooks lay in a clean bed, her hair washed, her hands steady. Medication and care had softened the storm inside her mind. When Imani entered, Renee looked up, her eyes focused. "You grew," Renee said slowly. Imani froze. "Mommy," she whispered. Renee smiled faintly. "You're still my baby." Imani collapsed in her arms, tears finally breaking free. For the first time, her mother knew her. Healing didn't happen overnight. Some days were harder than others. Some days the past tried to return. But this time, Imani wasn't alone. She studied harder than ever, not out of fear but freedom. She learned because she loved it, because it belonged to her, because someone finally believed she was worth investing in. Aaliyah thrived too. Their friendship deepened, no longer hidden, no longer secret. Together, they grew, not as charity and privilege, but as equals. One evening, Malcolm found Imani in the garden beneath the mango tree that had been replanted in the Carter yard. He watched her quietly for a moment. "You know," he said, "this tree reminds me that growth doesn't depend on where you start, only on whether someone protects the roots." Imani looked up at him. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me." Malcolm shook his head. "You were never invisible," he replied. "The world just didn't know how to look." That night, Imani lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, heart calm. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one curled on cardboard, whispering lessons into the dark. She hadn't disappeared. She had survived. And now, she was becoming something more. Imani Brooks was no longer the child the streets tried to erase. She was proof that intelligence does not belong to the wealthy. That potential is not limited by birth. That one act of compassion can break a cycle generations old. And as the future opened its doors, she walked through, not quietly, not afraid, but ready. Imani Brooks didn't rise because the world changed. She rose because someone finally saw her. Somewhere tonight, another child is whispering dreams into the dark, hoping knowledge will be enough to survive. This story reminds us of one truth. Talent isn't born into privilege. Opportunity is. If this moved you, share it, because the next Imani is still waiting, and being seen can change everything.